Hi, my name is Camry Moore. I'm one of the therapists here at Remedy Therapy. I found Remedy Therapy when I was looking for work, and it just really aligned with everything that I care about. Specifically, I noticed that they cared a lot about trauma and about just really focusing in on helping the clients. That was the main goal for them, and that really aligned with what is important to me as well. So there are so many different kinds of trauma. I think typically when we think about trauma, the more well-known traumatic experiences are like war or sexual or physical assault, car accidents or near-death experiences and things like that. But the truth is that, like I said, there are so many different kinds, and it can be an isolated event, it could be a repeated event, or something that's ongoing. Trauma can happen in childhood, it can happen in adulthood, it can even happen in the womb. So babies can be born with trauma just based on the experiences of the mother while they were being carried. One of the simplest and best ways that I've heard trauma be defined, that I think encompasses all the different kinds of trauma, is that trauma is when that need that we all have, that human need for safety or security, whether it be emotional or physical, when that need is denied or not met. It also includes things like poverty and food insecurity, sudden loss of a loved one, being constantly ridiculed or shamed by a parent, bullying, humiliation, parental divorce, infidelity, and even the pandemic that we're in right now. And honestly, the list goes on and on. So the textbook image I think we have of people who have been through trauma is that person who is super hyper vigilant, waking up from nightmares every night, having a ton of flashbacks. And yes, like that's absolutely true. That is an accurate depiction of what it looks like to have trauma for some people. But the reality is that trauma can be far less obvious, and it can look like things that we have different names for. So again, some of those commonly known signs of trauma are that hypervigilance and flashbacks and nightmares. But some of the commonly missed signs of trauma are depression and anxiety, panic attacks, suicidal ideation, self-harm, this inherent shame and guilt, having trouble focusing, having trouble remembering things, struggling to trust people, addiction, low self-esteem, and again, the list goes on and on. And this is obviously so important because without knowing the true root of what we're dealing with, we don't really get the proper treatment for what's going on with us. Contrary to popular belief, trauma is actually about so much more than the memories that we can explicitly see in our minds. And I think to understand this, we really need to understand the difference between explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memories are the memories that we can consciously bring to mind. We know who was there, who said what happened when they said that. We know exactly what happened. Whereas implicit memories are the memories that are more so associated with a felt sense. These memories don't have any way to distinguish between time or people or place. It's really just about the experience of the traumatic event that is stored in the body. And so most of the time when people are being triggered, or when their trauma is being triggered, they have no explicit memory of what happened or why they're being triggered or why they're reacting the way they're reacting. All they have is implicit memory. So when they're in a situation that triggers the feelings that happen in that implicit memory, the body remembers that, and the person automatically reacts in the present time in the very same way they reacted in the past during the actual event. So long story short, it's super important to know that trauma is about a lot more than just the memories that we can actually recall. More than anything, trauma manifests as an automatic reaction to something. And these are the memories that are actually difficult to deal with because they're responsible or associated with those automatic reactions that we have that we don't really like we don't know why we responded that way. So time will pass after the situation and we start to feel this shame, like, why couldn't I have just said this or done that, or why did I do this and that? And we don't really know why. And that this is the reason, because of these implicit memories that sort of transport us back to the trauma or to the past event. The way a person responds to trauma is not a sign of weakness or of strength. Trauma is not about willpower. It's all about the brain and it's about the body. I think a lot of people are surprised when they learn that trauma, when it happens, it can actually change the brain. Different brain structures become less active and some become more active. And so the different behaviors that we see people engaging in are a direct result of these changes in the brain and changes in the way the nervous system operates. In addition to that, trauma is stored in the brain and in the body. So when a traumatic experience happens, it can be so overwhelming to the brain that the brain just can't process it. So it'll store that in the back of the brain where all those safety seeking and survival based brain structures are located. And because of that, those brain structures become more sensitive and more reactive than they might be if those experiences hadn't happened. So a good example of this is to think about two people walking down the street, one of them who has trauma and the other person who doesn't. And they come across this black object on the ground. And the first person, the one who has trauma, they see it and their brain immediately screams like, that's a snake. And so they jump back and they go into fight or flight mode and they stop walking and they kind of freeze or they run or whatever the fight or flight response might be. Whereas the person who doesn't have trauma, they'll see that object and very quickly they might discern that that's a stick. There's no harm that's going to be done to me. And so they just keep walking and enjoy the rest of their day. Whereas the person with the trauma, they will eventually, of course, come to the conclusion that it wasn't a snake and that it was a stick, but they will probably stay in fight or flight mode for a while longer because the brain is so hypersensitive to any sort of threat to their safety. Some people who have been through trauma are always in fight or flight mode, and that causes a lot of stress to the body. Now, this is not a failure on the part of the brain. It's actually an adaptive measure that the brain takes because it wants to protect that person from being exposed to that overwhelming trauma again and wants that person to be on guard so they can protect themselves. I know this can be a hard thing, I think, for people to grasp and to wrap our minds around because it can sound like this is the end of the story, my brain is broken. But in reality, it's not. The brain can heal again, it can change again, it can adapt again, and the nervous system can be regulated again as well. Sometimes people who are in recovery from trauma are having to learn to do what is unnatural to them in a lot of ways, and that is not always pretty. For instance, one of the most common signs of trauma is a discomfort with emotions or numbness. When you're in therapy, kind of what's part of the process is talking about your feelings and learning to deal with those emotions. And so that is not easy, and it certainly isn't something that people can learn to do overnight.
Thank you for your interest in remedy therapy. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in discovering more or like to schedule an appointment, head over to our website at this link. Thank you, and hope to see you soon.